She was hired for just 30 days, a temporary assistant to one of the most powerful CEOs in Qatar, tasked with nothing more than filing documents and answering phones. But on her final day, when she walked into his office and spoke 4 words, that would change everything. The truth she revealed didn't just shock him, it shattered everything he thought he knew about power and privilege and the woman who had been silently watching his every move. This is the story of Khadija, a woman who crossed an ocean with secrets buried deeper than anyone could imagine, and Rashid Al-Mansouri, a billionaire who discovered that sometimes the most profound revelations come from the most unexpected places. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra, special for you. The heat of Doha hit Khadija like a physical wall as she stepped off the plane at Hamad International Airport. Her single suitcase felt heavier than it should have, not because of its contents, but because of what it represented. Everything she owned in the world, packed into one worn leather case that had seen better decades. She clutched the temporary work visa in her sweating palm, the official seal of Qatar still feeling surreal beneath her fingertips. 30 days, that's all she had been granted. 30 days to work as a temporary assistant at Al-Mansouri Holdings, one of the largest construction and investment firms in the Gulf. The agency back in Accra had called it a miracle. Visas like this didn't come to women like her. Women with no corporate experience, no university degrees, no connections to speak of. But here she was. The recruitment officer had been oddly specific about the requirements. The CEO personally requested someone different, they had said, avoiding her eyes. Someone who wouldn't get comfortable, wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't expect permanence. The phrase had stung, but she needed the work desperately. Her savings had run dry months ago, and the modest pension from her late husband barely covered rent in their small apartment in Ghana. At 52, Khadija had cleaned offices, tended gardens, and cooked for wealthy families throughout Accra. She was invisible labor, the kind of woman people relied on but never really saw, which made this opportunity all the more bewildering. Why would a billionaire CEO personally request a housekeeper from West Africa to work in his corporate headquarters? The taxi ride through Doha's gleaming streets felt like traveling through a fever dream. Glass towers stretched impossibly high, their surfaces reflecting the brutal afternoon sun. Everything looked new, constructed yesterday, polished to perfection. So different from the dusty, lived-in streets of her neighborhood back home, where buildings wore their age like comfortable clothes and children played football with makeshift balls in narrow alleyways. Al-Mansouri Holdings occupied 3 floors of a crystalline tower in West Bay. Its logo, a geometric pattern that seemed to shift depending on the angle, etched in gold across the building's facade. Khadija stood on the sidewalk for a full minute, staring up at it, trying to reconcile this monument to wealth with her own modest reality. The security guard at the reception desk looked her up and down with barely concealed skepticism. Her simple black dress and worn leather handbag clearly marked her as someone who didn't belong in this world of marble floors and fresh orchids. But her paperwork was legitimate, and after 3 phone calls and 20 minutes of waiting, she was issued a temporary badge and directed to the 32nd floor. The elevator ride felt eternal. When the doors finally opened, she found herself in a reception area that looked more like a luxury hotel lobby than an office. The woman behind the reception desk, immaculately dressed, perfectly manicured, speaking into a diamond-studded Bluetooth earpiece, barely glanced up when Khadija approached. "You're the temporary," the receptionist said. Not a question, but a statement loaded with dismissal. "Ms. Farah will show you to your workspace." Ms. Farah emerged from a side office with the brisk efficiency of someone accustomed to managing problems. She was younger than Khadija, probably in her 30s, with the kind of polished confidence that came from elite education and family connections. Her handshake was firm but brief, her smile professional but cold. "Mrs. Khadija, welcome to Al-Mansouri Holdings. I trust your journey was comfortable." Khadija nodded, not mentioning the sleepless night in the airport hotel or the anxiety that had churned in her stomach for the past week. "Your role here is quite straightforward," Ms. Farah continued, leading her down a corridor lined with abstract art and fresh flowers. "Document filing, phone answering, basic correspondence, nothing complicated. You'll be working in the archive office. It's quieter there, less distracting." The archive office was tucked away in a corner of the floor, separated from the main workspace by frosted glass walls. It was smaller than Khadija had expected, with 2 desks, several filing cabinets, and a view of the construction cranes that dotted Doha's ever-changing skyline. "The previous assistant left rather suddenly," Ms. Farah explained, gesturing to the desk that would be Khadija's. "There's quite a backlog of filing to catch up on. I trust that won't be a problem?" "No problem at all," Khadija replied quietly. Ms. Farah handed her a thick manila folder. "These are the files that need to be organized and entered into our digital system. The computer password is on a sticky note inside the folder. Lunch is from 12 to 1, prayer breaks are accommodated as needed, and your working hours are 8 to 5. Any questions?" Khadija shook her head, though dozens of questions swirled in her mind. Why had she been specifically requested? What had happened to the previous assistant? And why did she get the distinct feeling that she was being deliberately kept away from the main office activities? After Ms. Farah left, Khadija sat at her desk and opened the manila folder. The files inside were a mixture of contracts, correspondence, and financial documents, all stamped with various dates and signatures. Some were in Arabic, others in English, a few in what looked like French. The company's business seemed to span continents: construction projects in East Africa, investment partnerships in Southeast Asia, real estate developments across the Middle East. As she began sorting through the papers, organizing them by date and project, a pattern began to emerge. Many of the documents related to a specific initiative, something called the Heritage Foundation Project. The correspondence was marked confidential, and the amounts of money involved were staggering. Millions of dollars flowing between Al-Mansouri Holdings and various international organizations, all connected to this mysterious foundation. What struck her most was the geographic focus. The Heritage Foundation project seemed concentrated in West and Central Africa, Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, Cameroon. Countries she knew well, languages she recognized, places that felt familiar even on official letterhead. One letter, dated just 6 months prior, caught her attention. It was written on expensive stationery, the kind with watermarks and raised lettering, addressed to Mr. Rashid Al-Mansouri personally. The signature at the bottom was illegible, but the language was formal, almost reverent. "Your commitment to honoring the legacy of the diaspora through sustainable development continues to exceed our highest expectations." Khadija read the line twice, then 3 times. The diaspora, her people, scattered across oceans and generations, connected by histories both beautiful and painful. She set the letter aside and continued filing, but her mind wouldn't settle. Why would a Qatari construction mogul be investing millions in African heritage projects? And why did she have the nagging feeling that her presence here, a middle-aged Ghanaian woman with no corporate experience, was somehow connected to these confidential initiatives? The afternoon passed quietly. She made steady progress through the backlog of files, her fingers growing familiar with the rhythm of sorting, scanning, and digital entry. Occasionally, she heard voices in the corridor outside, the quick, clipped conversations of people accustomed to making decisions worth millions of dollars. But no one disturbed her, and she began to understand that the archive office was indeed intended to keep her separate from the company's day-to-day operations. At 5 o'clock, she packed up her small purse and prepared to leave. The building was still buzzing with activity, the kind of high-powered business that never truly stopped, but her role, it seemed, operated on more pedestrian hours. As she waited for the elevator, Ms. Farah appeared beside her. "How was your first day?" she asked, though her tone suggested the question was more courtesy than genuine interest. "Fine, thank you. The filing system is very organized." "Good. Oh, and Mrs. Khadija." Ms. Farah's voice dropped slightly. "Mr. Al-Mansouri occasionally reviews archived files. If he requests anything specific, please route it through me first. We have protocols for executive interactions." The elevator arrived before Khadija could respond, but as the doors closed between them, she caught something in Ms. Farah's expression, not just professional caution, but something that looked almost like worry. That night, in her small hotel room overlooking the construction sites that never seemed to sleep, Khadija lay awake, thinking about protocols and heritage foundations, about why a billionaire would personally request a temporary assistant he apparently wasn't supposed to interact with directly. 29 days remaining, she thought, and already she sensed that nothing about this assignment would be as simple as filing documents and answering phones. Outside her window, the lights of Doha glittered like scattered diamonds, beautiful and impenetrable, hiding secrets she was only beginning to suspect existed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The second week brought an unexpected rhythm to Khadija's days. She arrived each morning at precisely 7:45, 15 minutes before her official start time, and found comfort in the quiet moments before the office erupted into its daily symphony of conference calls and urgent meetings. The archive office had become her sanctuary, a place where she could work methodically through decades of corporate history, while the rest of Al-Mansouri Holdings buzzed with the frenetic energy of billion-dollar deals. But it was during these early morning hours that she began to notice him. Rashid Al-Mansouri arrived at the office every day at exactly 7:30. She could see him through the frosted glass of her office walls, a tall silhouette moving with purposeful strides toward the executive suite at the far end of the floor. He never looked in her direction, never acknowledged her presence, but there was something in his gait, a slight hesitation as he passed her office, that suggested awareness. She had studied his photograph in the company's annual reports while organizing the files. In the glossy corporate images, he appeared exactly as she would have expected, impeccably dressed, confidently posed, the very picture of modern Arab business success. Dark hair touched with distinguished grey at the temples, sharp jawline, eyes that seemed to look directly through the camera lens at whoever was viewing the photograph. But the man she glimpsed each morning through the frosted glass seemed different, less polished, more human. She caught sight of him once, very early, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Persian Gulf, and his posture held something that corporate photographs couldn't capture. A weight, perhaps even a sadness that spoke of burdens beyond quarterly earnings and market projections. It was on the Thursday of her second week that everything shifted. She was deep in a particularly complex set of financial documents related to the Heritage Foundation project when she heard voices in the corridor. Not the usual quick exchanges between colleagues, but something more heated, more urgent. "This is exactly what we were afraid of," a male voice was saying. The accent was local, educated, probably one of the senior executives she occasionally saw in expensive suits hurrying between meetings. "The foundation has been asking questions." Another voice replied. This one was familiar, Ms. Farah. They want more detailed reporting, more transparency about the selection criteria. Selection criteria for what? The first voice had risen slightly, tinged with anxiety. The scholarship recipients, the grant distributions, they're starting to connect patterns. Khadija found herself leaning closer to the frosted glass, her filing forgotten. Scholarship recipients. This was the first she'd heard of the Heritage Foundation project involving individual people, rather than just infrastructure and investment. How much do they know? The first voice again. Enough to be asking the right questions, and if they dig deeper. The voices were moving away now, heading toward the main conference room. Khadija strained to catch the rest of the conversation, but only fragments reached her. 20-year search. If she finds out everything we've built? The corridor fell silent, leaving Khadija with a racing heart and even more questions. Who was she? What kind of search had been going on for 20 years, and why did she have the growing certainty that these whispered conversations were somehow connected to her own presence in this building? That afternoon, she made a decision that would have seemed impossible just 2 weeks earlier. When Ms. Farah left for her usual extended lunch meeting, Khadija quietly slipped out of the archive office and made her way toward the executive suite. The corridor leading to Rashid Al-Mansouri's office was lined with artifacts that told the story of his business empire, photographs of construction projects across 3 continents, architectural models of gleaming developments, awards from international business organizations. But it was the smaller, more personal items that caught her attention. A traditional dhow boat model, a piece of what looked like ancient calligraphy, and most intriguingly, a small display case containing what appeared to be African art. She stopped in front of the case, studying the objects inside. There was a carved wooden mask that she recognized as originating from the Ashanti region of Ghana, her homeland. Beside it sat a piece of kente cloth, its gold and green patterns telling stories that her grandmother had taught her to read decades ago. And at the center of the display, almost hidden among the other artifacts, was a small photograph. Khadija pressed closer to the glass, her breath fogging the surface as she tried to make out the details of the image. It showed a young woman, African, standing beside a man who looked remarkably like a younger version of Rashid Al-Mansouri. They were both smiling, but there was something in the woman's eyes, a mixture of joy and uncertainty, that struck Khadija with unexpected familiarity. She was beautiful, wasn't she? The voice behind her was quiet, measured, with the kind of educated British accent that spoke of international schools and university degrees. Khadija spun around to find Rashid Al-Mansouri, standing just a few feet away, his dark suit impeccable despite the late hour, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry, sir," she began, backing away from the display case. "I was just looking at the artifacts," he finished for her. "It's quite all right. Most people who work here never notice them." He stepped closer, standing beside her to look at the same display that had captured her attention. This close, she could see details that the corporate photographs hadn't revealed. The slight lines around his eyes that spoke of long nights and difficult decisions. The way his hands, when he clasped them behind his back, trembled almost imperceptibly. "You're Khadija," he said. "Not a question, but a statement." "Yes, sir, I'm the temporary assistant. I know who you are." He turned to look at her directly, and she was struck by the intensity of his gaze. "I was the one who requested you specifically." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Khadija felt her heart racing, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "May I ask why, sir?" Rashid was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an attention that made her acutely aware of every line, every mark of the years she'd lived. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. "Because 23 years ago, I made a promise, and I've been looking for the right person to help me keep it ever since." Before she could respond, the sound of approaching voices echoed down the corridor. Ms. Farah's voice, sharp with concern. "Sir, your 3 o'clock appointment has been waiting." She stopped abruptly when she saw them standing together by the display case. "Ms. Farah," Rashid said smoothly, his executive mask sliding back into place, "please reschedule my 3 o'clock and cancel my remaining appointments for today. Sir, the Singapore investors are calling at 4, and the board meeting can wait." His tone brooked no argument. "Mrs. Khadija, would you join me in my office? There are some files I'd like you to review." Ms. Farah's expression flickered, between confusion and alarm, but she said nothing as Rashid led Khadija toward his private office. As they walked, Khadija caught sight of Ms. Farah reaching for her phone, her fingers moving quickly across the screen in what looked like an urgent text message. Rashid's office was exactly what she would have expected from a billionaire CEO, floor to ceiling. Windows offering a panoramic view of Doha's skyline, furniture that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries, walls lined with awards and photographs documenting a career of extraordinary success. But it was the personal touches that surprised her. Books in multiple languages, including several that she recognized as being about African history and culture, a prayer rug that looked well used, and most unexpectedly, a simple wooden desk, chair that seemed oddly out of place among the luxurious furnishings. "Please, sit," Rashid said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. He moved to a wall, safe hidden behind a painting, his fingers working quickly on a digital combination lock. When it opened, he withdrew a thick manila folder. Much older and more worn than anything she'd encountered in the company's regular files. He placed the folder on his desk, but didn't open it immediately. Instead, he sat back in his chair and looked at her with that same intense scrutiny she'd experienced in the corridor. "Mrs. Khadija, what I'm about to share with you is not part of your regular duties. In fact, it's not something that anyone else in this company, with the exception of one other person, knows about. I'm trusting you with this information because I believe, I hope, that you might be the answer to something I've been searching for." He opened the folder and withdrew a photograph, placing it face up on the desk between them. It was an older version of the image she'd glimpsed in the display case, the same young African woman, the same younger Rashid, but this time they weren't alone. Between them stood a little girl, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, with the woman's dark eyes and Rashid's distinctive jawline. "Her name was Amara," Rashid said quietly. "This photograph was taken in Accra in 1999. We had just married, despite the considerable opposition from both our families. She was a teacher, working with children in one of the poorest districts of the city. I was young, arrogant, convinced that love could overcome any obstacle." Khadija studied the photograph, feeling an odd sense of recognition that she couldn't quite place. The woman, Amara, had the kind of face that seemed familiar even to a stranger, warm and intelligent, with a smile that reached her eyes. "What happened to her?" Khadija asked softly. Rashid's expression darkened. "My family happened. The business happened. The expectations of what a man in my position could and couldn't do, who he could and couldn't marry, what kind of life he was allowed to build." He paused, his hands clenched on the desk. "I was weak. I let them convince me that marrying Amara would destroy everything I'd worked for, that it would scandal the family, ruin business relationships, cost millions in lost opportunities. So you left her." I sent her away. The words came out like a confession. Paid for her to relocate, set up a trust fund, told myself I was being practical, protecting both of us from a situation that would only get worse. Khadija looked again at the little girl in the photograph. "And your daughter?" Rashid's face crumpled almost imperceptibly. I told myself she would be better off without me, that Amara could give her a stable life, away from the pressures and complications of my world. I convinced myself that money was enough, that providing financial support was the same as being a father. But it wasn't. No, it wasn't. He reached into the folder again and withdrew a stack of letters, all bearing the same return address in Accra. Amara wrote to me for years, sent photographs, school reports, updates about our daughter's life. I read every letter, kept every photograph, but I never responded. I told myself I was protecting them by staying away. He handed Khadija one of the letters. The handwriting was careful, educated, filled with the kind of details that only a mother would think to include. Kessie got her first tooth this week. She loves music, especially when I sing to her in Twi. She has your eyes, Rashid, and your stubborn streak. Kessie, Khadija repeated, the name feeling familiar on her tongue. It means born on Sunday in Twi. Amara chose it because she said Sunday children are destined for great things. His voice broke slightly. The letters stopped coming 7 years ago. Khadija looked up from the letter, understanding beginning to dawn. You've been looking for them. I've been looking for her, for Kessie, my daughter. He leaned forward, his eyes intense with something between hope and desperation. The Heritage Foundation project isn't just about investment and development. It's a network I've built across West Africa, working with local organizations, schools, NGOs. Officially, we're funding education and infrastructure. Unofficially, I've been searching for any trace of what happened to Amara and Kessie. And you think I can help you find them? Rashid nodded slowly. You're from Accra. You understand the community, the culture, the ways that people can disappear into systems that outsiders can't navigate. You have connections, knowledge, insights that my investigators and contacts have been missing. Khadija set the letter down carefully, her mind racing. What makes you think they want to be found? The question seemed to surprise him. What do you mean? You sent them away 23 years ago. You ignored their attempts to maintain contact for 16 years. What makes you think that finding them now would be welcome rather than intrusive? Rashid was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because 2 weeks ago, I received this. He reached into the folder one final time and withdrew a single sheet of paper. It was a letter, but not in Amara's handwriting. The script was younger, less practiced, but unmistakably similar. Dear Mr. Al-Mansouri, Khadija read aloud, my name is Kessie Osei. I believe you knew my mother, Amara Osei, many years ago. She passed away last month, and in her effects I found boxes of letters that she wrote to you but never sent. I am writing to inform you that she never stopped loving you, and that she always hoped you would come looking for us. If you receive this letter and still care to know about the daughter you left behind, I can be reached at the address below. Khadija looked up to find Rashid watching her with an expression of raw vulnerability. She found me, he said simply. After all these years of searching, my daughter found me first. The silence in Rashid's office stretched between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Khadija held Kessie's letter in her hands, reading it again, each word carrying the weight of decades of separation and loss. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, Doha's afternoon traffic moved in distant streams of light, but inside this space, time seemed suspended. She wants to meet you, Khadija said finally, looking up from the letter. Rashid nodded, but his expression was complicated. Hope wrestling with fear, longing battling with guilt. The address she provided, it's in a district of Accra I don't recognize. My investigators tried to locate it, but... He trailed off, running a hand through his graying hair. But outsiders asking questions in certain neighborhoods can make people disappear faster than they appeared. Khadija finished for him. It was a truth she knew intimately. In communities that had learned to be wary of powerful men with resources and agendas, survival often meant becoming invisible. Exactly. Rashid leaned back in his chair, and for the first time since she'd known him, he looked every one of his 55 years. Mrs. Khadija, I need to ask you something, and I want you to understand that you can refuse without any consequences. To your position here, she waited, sensing the gravity of whatever was coming. I want you to go to Ghana, to find my daughter, to explain. He paused, struggling with words that seemed inadequate for the task before him. To explain why a father who abandoned his child now wants desperately to be part of her life. The request hung in the air like a challenge. Khadija set the letter down carefully on his desk, her mind racing through the implications. You want me to be your intermediary. I want you to be my hope, he said quietly, because I think if anyone can understand the complexities of what I'm asking, the cultural dynamics, the hurt that needs healing, the bridges that need rebuilding, it would be you. Khadija studied his face, seeing past the executive composure to something raw and vulnerable underneath. What makes you think I'm the right person for this? Rashid was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the photographs on his desk. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of confession. Because you remind me of her, of Amara, not just physically, though there are similarities that take my breath away sometimes, but the way you move through the world, quietly observant, dignified despite circumstances that might break others, strong in ways that don't need to be announced. He met her eyes. And because I've been watching you for 2 weeks, and I've seen how you handle information that others would use for gossip or leverage, you've kept the confidentiality of what you've discovered in those files, even when it clearly puzzled you. You've been testing me. I've been hoping, he corrected, hoping that when I finally found the courage to ask for help, I would be asking the right person. Khadija stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city that had become her temporary home. Below, the construction cranes worked tirelessly, building a future that someone else had envisioned. She thought about her own life, the careful, small existence she'd built after her husband's death, the way she'd learned to be content with invisibility, with safety, with the predictable rhythm of days that demanded nothing extraordinary from her. If I go, she said without turning around, I go as myself, not as your employee, not as your representative. I go as a Ghanaian woman talking to another Ghanaian woman about family, about forgiveness, about the complicated ways that love and abandonment can exist in the same story. I wouldn't want it any other way. And I need to understand something first. She turned to face him. Why now? What changed? You've had the resources to search for them for decades. You could have responded to Amara's letters, could have tried to build a relationship with your daughter when she was young, and might have been more open to it. Why wait until now, when the wounds have had 23 years to calcify? Rashid's expression darkened, and she saw something flicker across his features. Shame, perhaps, or regret, so deep it had become a physical pain. Because 3 months ago, I was diagnosed with a condition that has forced me to confront my own mortality, he said quietly. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but something that has made me realize that all the business empires and investment portfolios in the world mean nothing if you die knowing that the people who should have mattered most to you never had the chance to forgive you. The honesty of the admission hit Khadija like a physical blow. She had expected explanations about business timing or family pressure or legal complications. She hadn't expected this. The simple, terrible recognition of a man who had finally run out of time to keep running from his past. What condition? She asked gently. Early-stage kidney disease, Manageable with treatment, but progressive. The doctors say I have years, possibly decades, if I take care of myself, but it was the wake-up call I apparently needed." He smiled ruefully. "Amazing how the prospect of your own mortality can clarify what actually matters." Khadija returned to her seat, her mind working through the implications of everything he'd told her. "There's something else, isn't there? Something you haven't told me about why you specifically requested me." Rashid's expression shifted, becoming guarded. "What makes you say that?" "Because a man with your resources doesn't hire a temporary assistant from Ghana by accident. You could have found intermediaries, cultural consultants, private investigators with expertise in family reunification. Instead, you went through a specific agency to request a specific type of person for a job that doesn't actually require what you're asking me to do." She leaned forward. "Who am I, really? What connection do I have to your story that I don't know about?" The question seemed to physically pain him. Rashid reached into his desk drawer and withdrew another folder, this one even more worn than the first. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. "Mrs. Khadija, what is your maiden name?" The question caught her off guard. "Oh, say, why?" Rashid closed his eyes for a moment as if gathering courage. When he opened them, they were bright with unshed tears. Amara's full name was Amara Osei Mensah. She told me she had family throughout Accra, cousins and aunts, and distant relatives connected through the Osei lineage. It's a common name, I know, but when the agency sent me your file..." He withdrew a document from the folder. Her employment application. "Your age, your background, your maiden name, the district where you grew up. It's possible, probable even, that you and Amara are related." The words hit Khadija like a physical force. She stared at him, then at her own employment application. Lying on his desk, her handwriting suddenly looking foreign to her own eyes. "You think I'm related to your wife? I think you might be the family connection that could help my daughter understand that reaching out to me wasn't a mistake." His voice was barely above a whisper. "I think you might be the bridge between the world I forced them to leave and the world I'm desperately hoping they'll let me back into." Khadija's mind raced through memories she hadn't accessed in years. Her father's family, the Oseis, had been large and scattered, with branches throughout Ghana and beyond. Cousins she'd never met, relatives whose names were mentioned at family, who gatherings but whose faces she'd never seen. Her grandmother had always said that the Osei family tree was like a baobab, roots spreading so wide and deep that you never knew where they might surface. "Amara Osei Mensah," she repeated slowly. The name struck a chord of recognition, but faint, like an echo of an echo. "When did you say she was born?" Rashid flipped through the papers in Amara's folder. 1975. In Accra, in the La Paz district. Khadija's breath caught. "My cousin Amma was born in 1975, in La Paz. She moved away when we were children. Her family relocated for her father's work, I think. I haven't seen her in..." She paused, calculating. 40 years, maybe more. "Do you remember her full name?" Khadija closed her eyes, reaching back through decades of memory to family gatherings and childhood conversations. Amma was short for Amara, and yes, her family name was Osei Mensah before her father changed it for business reasons. The silence that followed was profound, charged with the electricity of revelation. Rashid stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, and Khadija felt the ground shifting beneath her understanding of her own life. "You're her cousin," Rashid said, his voice filled with wonder and something that might have been relief. "You're Casey's family." "If it's the same Amara," Khadija said carefully, though every instinct told her it was. "If the cousin I lost touch with decades ago is the woman you loved and lost." Rashid reached for another photograph from Amara's folder, this one showing her with what appeared to be extended family at some kind of celebration. He pointed to a young girl in the background, perhaps 8 or 9 years old. Does she look familiar? Khadija studied the image, and there she was, her own young face staring back at her across the decades. The photograph had been taken at what looked like a wedding, and she remembered now, cousin Amara's brother's wedding, the last family event they'd attended together before Amara's family moved away. "That's me," she whispered. "I remember that day. I remember Amara. She was older, more sophisticated than the rest of us. She talked about traveling, about seeing the world beyond Ghana." Khadija looked up at Rashid. "She always said she was going to marry someone extraordinary." "She did," Rashid said quietly, "and then I failed her." The weight of this revelation settled over them both. Khadija was no longer just a temporary assistant being asked to help a wealthy man reconnect with his estranged daughter. She was family, blood family, being asked to heal a wound that had torn through her own lineage without her even knowing it existed. "Kessie doesn't know about me," she said finally. "No. But maybe—" Rashid hesitated. "Maybe when you meet her, when you explain who you are and why you're there, it will help her understand that this isn't just about a father trying to ease his conscience. It's about family finding family, about completing a circle that was broken before she was old enough to understand what was lost." Khadija stood again, pacing to the window as she processed the magnitude of what was being asked of her. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the city. In a few hours, she would return to her hotel room, call her sister back in Accra, and try to explain why she was suddenly asking questions about cousin Amara, who had disappeared from family consciousness decades ago. "If I do this," she said without turning around, "there are no guarantees. Kessie may not want to see you. She may be angry about Amara's death, about the years of abandonment, about the way you let pride and fear keep you from being the father she deserved. I know. And if she is angry, if she tells me that contacting her was a mistake, and that you should stay in your world while she builds her life in hers, I will honor that. I won't push, I won't manipulate, I won't try to convince her to forgive you just because you're finally ready to ask for forgiveness." "I understand." Khadija turned to face him. "Then yes, I'll go to Ghana, I'll find Kessie, and I'll try to help you both understand what it means to be family when family has been defined by absence for so long." Rashid's relief was visible, his shoulders dropping as if a weight he'd been carrying for decades had finally shifted. "Thank you," he said simply. "Don't thank me yet," Khadija replied. "Thank me when we find out whether love and family are strong enough to survive the damage that fear and pride can do." As she prepared to leave his office, Rashid called her name one more time. "Mrs. Khadija, when you see her, when you see Kessie, will you tell her that not a day has passed in 23 years that I haven't thought about her, that I've kept every photograph, every letter, every memory of the daughter I was too afraid to claim, but never stopped loving." Khadija paused at the door, her hand on the handle. "I'll tell her," she said, "but the question isn't whether you've been thinking about her. The question is whether she's ready to think about you." And with that, she left him alone with his hopes, his fears, and the photographs of a family he was finally brave enough to try to reclaim. The flight from Doha to Accra gave Khadija 12 hours to wrestle with the magnitude of what she had agreed to do. As the plane tracked across the Arabian Peninsula, over the Horn of Africa, and down the continent toward home, she stared out the small window at the patchwork of desert, mountains, and eventually green that marked her journey back to a place she had left only 3 weeks ago as one person and was returning to as someone entirely different. In her carry-on bag, she carried copies of everything Rashid had shared with her, photographs, letters, documents that painted the picture of a love story interrupted by fear and a father-daughter relationship severed by pride. But more than that, she carried the weight of representing not just Rashid's hopes for reconciliation, but her own family's lost connections. During the layover in Cairo, she had called her sister Akosua from a payphone in the terminal, the international calling card Rashid had given her, making the connection clear despite the distance. "You're asking about cousin Amara after 40 years. Akosua's voice had been filled with confusion and curiosity. "Why now, sister? What's brought her name back to your mind?" Khadija had struggled with how much to reveal. "I may have found someone who knew her, someone who lost touch and is trying to reconnect with family. Amara is dead, Khadija. Has been for years. I heard it from Aunt Afua maybe, 7, 8 years ago. She died young, somewhere far from home, left a daughter behind." The confirmation had hit Khadija like a physical blow, even though Rashid had already told her. Hearing it from family, from the network of relatives who had carried the news across years and continents, made it real in a way that corporate documents couldn't. "Do you know anything about the daughter?" "Only that she exists." Afua said Amara never brought her around family, never spoke much about the father. There were whispers that he was foreign, maybe wealthy, but... Akosua had paused. "You know how these stories become legends. Truth gets mixed with speculation until no one remembers which is which." Now, as the plane began its descent into Kotoka International Airport, Khadija watched the familiar skyline of Accra emerge through the early morning haze. The city had grown in the 3 weeks she'd been away, or perhaps she was simply seeing it with different eyes. The sprawling neighborhoods that stretched between the airport and the coast seemed more complex now, full of stories and connections she had never noticed before. The address Casey had provided in her letter led to Nima, a densely populated area that had grown organically over decades, where corrugated metal roofs stretched as far as the eye could see, and narrow lanes twisted between compounds that housed extended families, small businesses, and the daily rhythm of urban Ghanaian life. It was the kind of neighborhood where strangers were noticed immediately, but where family connections could open doors that would remain closed to outsiders. Khadija took a shared taxi from the airport, the familiar chaos of Accra traffic washing over her like a homecoming. The driver, a young man with music playing softly from speakers that had seen better days, glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "You coming from abroad, sister?" "Qatar," she replied, the words still feeling strange in her mouth. "Ah, Gulf money. Good for you." He navigated around a trotro that had stopped to pick up passengers. "You going to Nima to visit family?" Something like that. The neighborhood, when they reached it, was exactly as she had expected, bustling, with the energy of people making lives work through ingenuity and determination. Children played football in small, cleared spaces between buildings. Women carried goods, balanced perfectly on their heads, and the smell of cooking oil and spices filled the air with the promise of shared meals. Finding the specific address proved more challenging than she had anticipated. Street numbers in Nima were suggestions rather than certainties, and the compound she was looking for could only be located through a series of increasingly specific directions. Past the corner where "They sell phone credit," turn left at the blue gate, look for the house with the satellite dish and the hibiscus bush. When she finally found it, Khadija stood outside the metal gate for a full minute, gathering courage. The compound behind the gate was modest but well-maintained, with several small buildings arranged around a central courtyard, where laundry hung on lines and a few chickens pecked at the ground. She could hear voices, women talking, children playing, the domestic symphony of family life. She knocked on the gate. A young woman answered, perhaps 16 or 17, with skeptical eyes and the kind of protective posture that suggested she was accustomed to turning away people who didn't belong. "Good morning," Khadija said in Twi. "I'm looking for Kessie Ose. I have a message for her from family. The girl's expression shifted slightly. Which family? Osei family, from La Paz, originally. I'm Khadija. I was Khadija Osei before I married. The girl studied her for a long moment, then called over her shoulder in rapid Twi. An older woman emerged from one of the buildings, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps 60, with greying hair wrapped in a colourful headtie and the kind of direct gaze that missed nothing. You say you're Osei family? The woman asked. Yes, Auntie. My maiden name was Osei. I'm looking for my cousin's daughter, Amara's daughter. The woman's expression changed immediately, surprise and wariness mixing in her features. Amara is dead. I know. I'm sorry for your loss. For our loss. I only learned recently that she had passed. I've come to pay my respects and to meet Casey, if she's willing. The older woman exchanged a look with the girl, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, she stepped aside. Come inside. But understand, Casey doesn't talk to many people. She's been through enough. The compound was larger than it had appeared from outside, with several rooms arranged around the central courtyard. It was clear that multiple families shared the space, but it was clean, organized, and filled with the kind of life that spoke of community rather than poverty. The woman led her to a small sitting room, with plastic chairs and a low table. The walls were decorated with family photographs, school certificates, and a large calendar featuring a scenic view of Cape Coast Castle. I am Auntie Rose, the woman said, settling into one of the chairs. I took Casey in after Amara died. She had nowhere else to go. You're not related to her. Not by blood, but Amara was like a daughter to me when she came back from wherever she had been living. She was broken, sick. She died slowly, and she made me promise to take care of her girl. Khadija leaned forward. Auntie Rose, I need to tell you something that may be difficult to hear. I know who Casey's father is. The woman's expression hardened. That man who abandoned them, who let Amara struggle alone while he lived in luxury somewhere far away. The same man, but he's been looking for them. He never stopped thinking about them. Too late for thinking, Rose said sharply. Amara died calling his name, died hoping he would come, that he would help, that he would remember he had a daughter who needed him. The words hit Khadija with the force of accumulated grief. She thought about Rashid in his pristine office, surrounded by the trappings of success, tortured by regret, but insulated from the raw reality of what his absence had cost. He wants to make amends, she said quietly. With money? With guilt offerings? With the kind of help that comes too late to matter? Before Khadija could respond, another voice spoke from the doorway. Let her talk, Auntie Rose. I want to hear what she has to say. Khadija turned to see a young woman, perhaps 22 or 23, standing in the entrance to the sitting room. She had Amara's eyes and Rashid's jawline, but her expression held something that belonged entirely to her, a strength that seemed forged by years of disappointment and self-reliance. You're Casey. I am. The young woman moved into the room with deliberate grace, taking the chair across from Khadija. And you claim to be family. I am family. Your mother was my cousin. We lost touch when we were children, but Khadija reached into her bag and withdrew one of the photographs Rashid had shared, the one showing her at the family wedding, alongside young Amara. This was taken at your uncle's wedding. I was 8 years old. Your mother was 13. Casey took the photograph, studying it with the intensity of someone examining evidence. When she looked up, her expression had shifted slightly. You have the same nose, she said simply, the same way of holding your head. Mama used to say the OC women all carried themselves like queens, even when they had nothing. She was right. It was something our grandmother taught us. Casey handed the photograph back. So you're family. That doesn't explain what you're doing. Here now, asking about a father who never bothered to find us when it mattered. Khadija took a deep breath, knowing that everything depended on how she handled the next few minutes. Kessie, your father has been looking for you for 7 years, ever since your mother's letters stopped coming. Letters? Kessie's voice was sharp. What letters? Your mother wrote to him regularly, for 16 years, sent photographs, updates, about your life, invitations for him to be part of your world. The young woman's face went pale. That's not... Mama never said... He kept every letter, every photograph. He has a whole archive of your childhood, your school achievements, your mother's hopes for your future. Kessie stood abruptly, pacing, to the window that looked out on the compound's courtyard. You're lying. If he cared, if he was getting letters, why didn't he come? Why didn't he help when Mama got sick? Why did we struggle alone? Because he's a coward, Khadija said quietly. Because he was afraid of his family's reaction, afraid of the complications, afraid of the judgment, because he convinced himself that staying away was protecting you when really he was protecting himself. The honesty of the statement seemed to surprise Kessie. She turned from the window, studying Khadija's face. You're not here to defend him. I'm here to tell you the truth. All of it. The beautiful parts and the ugly parts and the complicated parts that don't fit into simple stories about good people and bad people. Kessie returned to her chair, her expression guarded but curious. Tell me. For the next hour, Khadija shared everything: Rashid's story of his marriage to Amara, his family's opposition, his decision to send them away, his years of reading letters without responding, his recent diagnosis and desperate search for redemption. She showed Kessie the photographs, read passages from Amara's letters, and painted a picture of a man who had spent 2 decades running from the best decision he had ever made. When she finished, the room was quiet, except for the sounds of life continuing in the compound outside. He's sick? Kessie asked finally, not dying but facing his own mortality in a way that has forced him to confront his regrets. And he sent you, family, to convince me to forgive him. He sent me to find you. What happens next is entirely your choice. Kessie was quiet for a long time, staring at the photographs spread on the low table between them. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight of years. I wrote to him once, after Mama died. I found her letters, the ones she never sent, filled with updates about my life, my schooling, my dreams. I realized she had been writing to a ghost, pouring her heart out to someone who never responded. She looked up at Khadija. I thought if I reached out, if I told him she was gone, maybe he would feel something, maybe he would care enough to at least acknowledge what he had lost. And now he has. Now he has, Kessie agreed. The question is whether caring now, when it's convenient for him, when his conscience demands it, is enough to balance 23 years of absence. Khadija leaned forward. That's not a question I can answer for you, but I can tell you this: family is complicated. Love is complicated. People make terrible decisions for reasons that seem important at the time and spend the rest of their lives trying to undo the damage. Do you think I should see him? I think you should do whatever feels right for the woman you've become, not what anyone else expects or needs or hopes for. Kessie smiled for the first time since Khadija had arrived, a small, thoughtful expression that transformed her entire face. You know what, cousin? She said. I think I'd like to hear more about this complicated man who loved my mother enough to marry her and feared the world enough to send her away. And in that moment, Khadija realized that the hardest part of her mission wasn't over. It was just beginning. Over the next 3 days, Khadija found herself drawn deeper into the life that Kessie and Amara had built in the years after Rashid's abandonment. What she discovered challenged everything she thought she understood about the story she had been told. Kesi worked as a teaching assistant at a primary school in East Legon, a 40-minute commute each way on crowded trotros that left her exhausted. But determined, she had completed her secondary education through night classes while caring for her dying mother and was slowly saving money for university fees that seemed perpetually out of reach. "Mama always said education was the one thing no one could take from you," Kesi explained as they walked through the bustling streets of Nima on her day off. "Even when we had nothing else, she made sure I went to school." But it was the details of Amara's final years that began to reveal a more complex truth than what Rashid had shared. According to Auntie Rose, who had become a surrogate mother to both women, Amara had returned to Ghana not as the abandoned wife of a wealthy man, but as a woman fleeing something far more sinister. She was afraid, Rose confided to Khadija on the second evening, as they sat in the courtyard watching Kesi help the compound's children with their homework. Not just heartbroken, afraid. She wouldn't talk about what happened in that foreign place, but she would wake up screaming some nights, and she was always looking over her shoulder, as if someone might be following. This revelation troubled Khadija deeply. In Rashid's version of events, Amara had simply been unable to handle the pressure of his family's disapproval and the social complexities of their intercultural marriage. He had portrayed her departure as a mutual decision, a recognition that their love wasn't strong enough to overcome the obstacles they faced, but fear suggested something darker: harassment, threats, perhaps even violence. "Did she ever mention Rashid's family specifically?" Khadija asked carefully. Rose's expression darkened. "She said his mother hired men to follow her, to take photographs of her when she went to market, when she picked up Kesi from school. She said they offered her money to disappear, and when she refused, they made it clear that the offers wouldn't continue indefinitely." The pieces of a more troubling puzzle began to fall into place. Khadija thought about the Heritage Foundation project, about Rashid's 20-year search, about the resources he claimed to have devoted to finding his lost family. If he had truly been looking for them with the determination he described, why had it taken Kesi's letter to finally make contact? Why had his investigators been unable to locate them in a community where family connections made privacy nearly impossible? On the third day, Kesi surprised her with a request. "I want to show you something," she said, leading Khadija through a maze of narrow streets to a small internet cafe tucked between a pharmacy and a tailor's shop. "I've been doing research since you arrived. About him, about his family, about what really happened." The internet cafe was crowded with young people checking email, students working on assignments, and entrepreneurs managing small businesses through social media. Kesi led her to a computer in the back corner and pulled up a saved browser session. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a newspaper article from a Qatari business journal dated 18 months earlier. The headline read, "Al-Mansouri Holdings faces succession questions as CEO health concerns mount." Khadija read through the article, which speculated about Rashid's medical condition and its implications for the company's future leadership. But it was a single paragraph near the end that caught her attention. Industry sources suggest that Al-Mansouri's recent focus on African development projects may be connected to personal rather than business interests, with some board members expressing concern about the allocation of company resources to what they term legacy initiatives. "Legacy initiatives," Kesi repeated. "He's been spending company money looking for us, not his personal money, investor money, and his board isn't happy about it." She clicked to another tab, revealing a social media profile that made Khadija's blood run cold. It belonged to Khalid Al-Mansouri, identified as Rashid's cousin and a senior executive at the company. The profile was filled with posts about traditional values, family honor, and protecting Qatari heritage from foreign influences. This man, Casey said, pointing to Khalid's photograph, commented on a news article about interracial marriage 2 weeks ago. He said, and I quote, "Some mistakes from the past continue to haunt families for generations. True leadership means having the courage to cut ties that weaken the foundation." Khadija felt a chill of recognition. She remembered the overheard conversation in the Al-Mansouri Holdings office, the voices discussing selection criteria and someone asking the right questions. She thought about Ms. Farah's nervous behavior, about the protocols that kept her separated from the main office activities. "Casey," she said quietly, "I think your father may not be the only one who knows I'm here." The young woman's expression sharpened. "What do you mean?" Khadija explained about the conversation she had overheard, about the tension she had sensed in the office, about the feeling that her hiring had been part of a larger game whose rules she didn't fully understand. "You think his family is using you to find me?" Casey said. "It wasn't a question. I think it's possible. I think your father's search for you may have created opportunities for people who would prefer that you stay lost." They left the internet, cafe in silence, both lost in thought as they navigated the afternoon crowds. It wasn't until they reached the compound that Casey spoke again. "There's something else I need to show you," she said, leading Khadija to her small room in one of the buildings that surrounded the courtyard. The room was modest but personal, filled with books, school certificates, and photographs that traced the outline of a life built through determination and struggle. But it was a wooden box hidden under the bed that Casey retrieved, handling it with the reverence reserved for precious things. "These are Mama's papers," she said, opening the box carefully. Her passport, her identification documents, her medical records from the clinic where she died. She handed Khadija a thick folder marked "Personal Correspondence." Inside were dozens of letters, not the ones Amara had written to Rashid and never sent, but letters she had received from lawyers, from private investigators, from people claiming to represent Rashid's interests. She was being contacted, Casey explained, for years. People offering money for information about me, about my education, about my plans for the future. Mama always refused to respond, but she kept the letters. Khadija read through the correspondence with growing alarm. The letters were consistent. In their message, Rashid Al-Mansouri was prepared to provide financial support for his daughter's education and welfare, but only through intermediaries, and only if certain conditions were met. The conditions were never explicitly stated, but the implications were clear. Casey was to remain in Ghana, pursue her education locally, and make no attempt to contact her father directly. "This isn't a father trying to reconnect with his daughter," Khadija said, looking up from the letters. "This is a father trying to manage his daughter from a distance while keeping her existence secret. Or," Casey said quietly, "it's a family trying to control a problem they thought they had solved 23 years ago." The final piece of the puzzle came in the form of a letter dated just 6 months earlier, after Amara's death, but before Casey had written to Rashid. It was from a law firm in Doha, informing Casey that she was the beneficiary of an educational trust that would provide full funding for university studies, with the stipulation that she pursue her education at an approved institution outside of the Middle East. "They wanted to send me away," Casey said. "Give me everything I needed to build a life, but somewhere far from Qatar, far from any possibility of embarrassing the Al-Mansouri family. But you didn't accept." I couldn't. It felt like another form of abandonment, another way of being told that I was acceptable only if I remained invisible. She looked at Khadija with eyes that held both pain and determination. "That's when I decided to write to him directly, to force the issue, to make him choose between acknowledging me and continuing to pretend I didn't exist." Khadija set the letters aside, her mind racing through the implications of everything they had discovered. Kessie, when your father asked me to come here, I don't think he knew about any of this. I think his family has been managing the situation without his knowledge, using his resources but following their own agenda. And now I think we need to be very careful about who we trust and what we reveal. Because if his family is willing to pay lawyers and investigators to keep you at a distance, they might be willing to do more than that to protect their interests. That evening, as they sat in the courtyard sharing a meal that Auntie Rose had prepared, Kessie asked the question that had been hanging between them for days. Do you still think I should meet him? Khadija considered the question carefully. Everything they had learned painted a picture of a man caught between genuine remorse and family pressure, between personal desires and institutional obligations. But it also revealed a young woman who had survived years of subtle manipulation and control, who had built her own life despite attempts to manage her from afar. I think, Khadija said finally, that you should meet him on your own terms, not as his secret daughter, not as a problem to be managed, but as the woman you've become, despite everything he and his family put you through. And if his family tries to stop it? Khadija smiled, thinking of her own journey from invisible domestic worker to family intermediary, from quiet observer to active participant in a story that had been unfolding for decades without her knowledge. Then they'll discover that Osei women are more formidable than they anticipated. Kessie laughed, the first genuinely joyful sound Khadija had heard from her since their first meeting. In that case, she said, I think it's time to call my father. But as they began to plan their next move, neither woman noticed the figure watching from across the street or the phone call being made from the shadows of a nearby building. The game they had thought they were playing, a simple story of family reconciliation, was about to become far more complicated. Because in Qatar, powerful families don't just wealth and influence to protect their interests. They use whatever means necessary to ensure that inconvenient truths stay buried, and that people who threaten the established order learn the consequences of challenging those who believe they control the narrative. The next phase of Kessie and Khadija's journey would test not just their courage, but their understanding of how far some people will go to keep family secrets from becoming public knowledge. The international call went through on the second attempt. Khadija had purchased a calling card from a vendor near the market, and they had chosen to make the call from a private booth at a telecommunications center, away from the compound where too many ears might overhear conversations that could change everything. Kessie's hands trembled as she dialed the number Khadija had given her, Rashid's direct office line. It was early evening in Accra, which meant early afternoon in Doha. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Al-Mansouri Holdings. This is Rashid Al-Mansouri. Hearing her father's voice for the first time in her life, Kessie froze. The voice was deeper than she had imagined, cultured, with the slight accent that came from decades of international business. But there was something else in it, a weariness that spoke of burdens carried for too long. "Hello?" Rashid said again, when no one responded. Kessie looked at Khadija, who nodded encouragingly. "Mr. Al-Mansouri," Kessie said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is Kessie Osei, your daughter." The silence that followed stretched across continents. Khadija could hear Rashid's sharp intake of breath, the sound of papers rustling, a chair creaking as if he had suddenly leaned forward. "Kessie," he said, and the single word carried decades of longing. "My God, Kessie." "Khadija found me," she said simply. "She told me about you, about Mama, about the letters. Are you all right? Are you safe? Do you need anything?" The rapid questions tumbled out of him, father's instincts awakening after years of dormancy. Kessie smiled despite herself. It was exactly what Amara had always said a good father would ask first. I'm safe, I'm working, I'm grown up. Yes, Rashid said quietly. Yes, you are. 23 years old, a teacher. I have photographs of you graduating from secondary school, but they're years old now. You have photographs? Your mother sent them, until the letters stopped coming. Kessie's grip tightened on the phone. Baba, she said, using the Twi word for father that felt strange and natural at the same time. We need to talk. There are things you don't know, things your family has been doing. Another silence, but this one felt different, charged with sudden alertness. What do you mean? I mean that while you've been searching for us, someone else has been making sure we stayed hidden. Someone else has been intercepting communications, making offers, trying to control our lives from a distance. Khadija could hear voices in the background on Rashid's end, office sounds, people moving, the distant ring of other phones. Then, Rashid's voice, muffled as if he had covered the receiver, cancel my appointments for the rest of the day, all of them, and close my door. When he spoke again, his voice was clearer, more focused. Tell me everything. For the next 20 minutes, Kessie laid out everything they had discovered, the threatening letters to Amara, the educational trust with its geographic restrictions, the pattern of surveillance and control that had shadowed their lives for years. Rashid listened without interruption, but Khadija could hear his breathing grow more labored as the scope of the deception became clear. The Heritage Foundation, he said finally. They told me they couldn't locate you through the normal channels. They said you had disappeared into the informal economy, that finding you would require more time, more resources. They knew exactly where we were, Kessie said. They were paying people to watch us. Khalid, Rashid said, the name spoken like a curse. My cousin Khalid has been managing the foundation's operations. He convinced me that direct involvement would compromise the search, that I needed to stay removed from the day-to-day activities. He's been protecting the family reputation by making sure your inconvenient daughter stayed inconvenient, Kessie said with a bitterness that surprised even her. Kessie, I swear to you, I had no knowledge of any threats made against your mother. If I had known, would you have done anything differently? The question came out sharper than she intended. Or would you have convinced yourself that it was for the best, that keeping us away was actually protecting us? The brutal honesty of the question hung between them like a challenge. When Rashid finally responded, his voice was barely audible. I don't know, he admitted, and that terrifies me more than anything else you've told me today. Kessie felt something shift inside her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but a recognition of honesty that she hadn't expected. Her father wasn't trying to justify his actions or minimize his failures. He was confronting them directly. There's something else, she said. I want to meet you, but not in Qatar, and not under circumstances that your family can control. If you want to know me, if you want to try to be my father after all these years, then you need to come here, to Ghana, to see how we lived, to understand what your absence cost, to meet the people who raised me when you weren't there. Yes, Rashid said immediately. Yes, I'll come. When? Next week. But Baba, if you come, your family will know. There will be consequences. Let me worry about the consequences. And if they try to stop you. Rashid's voice, when he answered, carried a strength that Kessie had never heard before, not the strength of wealth or position, but the strength of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. Then they'll discover that some things matter more than family approval. After they ended the call, Kessie and Khadija sat in the small booth, both emotionally drained by the weight of what had just transpired. The conversation had accomplished more than just establishing contact. It had forced all of them to confront the complexity of the situation they were navigating. "How do you feel?" Khadija asked gently. Kessie considered the question carefully. Scared, hopeful, angry, protective. She looked at her cousin. He sounded smaller than I expected, more human. Powerful men often do when they're forced to confront their failures. "Do you think he'll actually come?" Khadija thought about the man she had worked for, the executive, who commanded rooms full of investors and board members, but who had been undone by a photograph of the family he had lost. "I think he'll try. The question is whether his family will let him." As if summoned by her words, Khadija's phone buzzed. With an international number, she recognized it immediately, the Al-Mansouri Holdings main line. "Ms. Khadija!" The voice was crisp, professional, unfamiliar. "This is Khalid Al-Mansouri. I believe you've been working as a temporary assistant in our offices." Khadija felt her blood turn cold. "Yes, sir. I understand you've taken some personal time to visit Ghana. I hope you're enjoying your holiday." The words were polite, but there was an undercurrent of threat that made Khadija's skin crawl. "Yes, sir, thank you. I'm calling because there's been a change in your employment status. Due to some irregularities in your work visa application, we're going to have to terminate your contract immediately. Of course, we'll provide full compensation for your time, plus a generous severance package." Irregularities. Nothing serious, I'm sure, but company policy requires us to be very careful about documentation. I trust you understand. Kessie, listening to the one-sided conversation, grabbed a pen and paper and wrote quickly, "He's trying to get you out of the country." Khadija nodded, her mind racing. "Mr. Al-Mansouri, I'd like to speak with Rashid about this directly." "I'm afraid Mr. Al-Mansouri is unavailable. He's been called away on urgent business, family matters, you understand. He may be difficult to reach for the next several weeks." The threat was becoming clearer. Cut off her employment, invalidate her visa, force her to return to Qatar, where she could be controlled, or eliminate her ability to stay in Ghana, where she could continue helping Kessie. "I see," Khadija said carefully. "And if I were to extend my stay in Ghana independently?" "Well, that would be your choice, of course, though I should mention that your visa status might make re-entry to Qatar complicated. We wouldn't want any legal difficulties to arise." After ending the call, Khadija explained the conversation to Kessie, who listened with growing anger. "They're cutting you off," Kessie said, "trying to isolate me again, and probably putting pressure on your father to stay away." They walked back toward the compound in thoughtful silence, both aware that the game had shifted dramatically. What had begun as a family reconciliation was now a battle for control between two different visions of what family meant. One based on tradition and reputation, the other based on truth and connection. "Cousin," Kessie said as they reached the compound's gate, "I think we're about to find out just how far people will go to keep their secrets." "And they're about to find out," Khadija replied, "just how far Osei women will go to protect their family." The war for Kessie's future and Rashid's soul was just beginning. Back in Doha, Rashid Al-Mansouri sat in his office staring at the phone long after the call with Kessie had ended. The familiar weight of his executive chair felt different now. Not like a throne of power, but like a trap he had built around himself with decades of compromise and fear. The door to his office burst open without a knock. Khalid Al-Mansouri strode in with the confidence of a man who had never learned to ask permission, followed by two other men Rashid recognized as senior board members. "We need to talk," Khalid announced, settling into the chair across from Rashid's desk as if he owned it. "About your recent communication issues." "My communications are my own business. Not when they involve company resources and family reputation," said Ahmed Al-Thani, the eldest board member and a man whose opinion carried weight with investors. "Not when they threaten everything we've built." Khalid leaned forward, his expression a mixture of concern and calculation. "Rashid, we know about the phone call. We know the African woman has made contact with the girl. Her name is Casey, she's my daughter, and the African woman is Khadija, her cousin and my employee." "Former employee," Khalid corrected smoothly. "Her contract has been terminated due to visa irregularities." Rashid's hands clenched on his desk. "On whose authority?" "Mine. As acting head of operations, while you've been distracted. You had no right?" "I had every right," Khalid's voice rose. "I've been cleaning up your messes for 23 years, Rashid. I arranged for the woman and child to leave quietly. I managed the payments to keep them comfortable and distant. I built the Heritage Foundation to channel your guilt into something productive instead of destructive." The admission hung in the air like an indictment. Ahmed and the other board member exchanged glances, their discomfort obvious. "You threatened them," Rashid said quietly. "You had my wife followed. You terrorized a pregnant woman." "I protected this family," Khalid shot back. "I protected this company. I did what you were too weak to do." Rashid stood slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Get out of my office!" "Rashid, get out!" The force of his voice surprised everyone, including himself. Ahmed cleared his throat diplomatically. "Perhaps we should discuss this more calmly. There are solutions that can benefit everyone." "I'm listening," Rashid said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "The girl wants money for education, yes? We provide it, generously, enough for the finest universities in America, Europe, wherever she chooses. In exchange, she signs a discretion agreement. No contact with media, no public acknowledgement of family connections, no complications for the business. You want to buy her silence. We want to buy her future," Ahmed corrected. "Give her opportunities while protecting the stability that benefits thousands of employees and investors." Rashid walked to the window, looking out at the construction cranes that never stopped building, always reaching toward a sky that remained perpetually out of reach. "And if I refuse?" Khalid's voice turned cold. "Then you'll find that board votes can change very quickly when members become concerned about leadership stability. You're threatening a coup." "I'm preventing one," Khalid replied. "Your recent behavior, the medical condition, the emotional instability, the misuse of company resources for personal obsessions, has already raised questions. Some board members are wondering if it's time for new leadership." Rashid turned from the window, his expression unreadable. "I need time to consider your proposal." "Time is a luxury we don't have," Ahmed said. "The girl has apparently invited you to Ghana. If you make that trip, if there are photographs, if the media connects the story." He shrugged. "The damage to our regional partnerships alone could cost hundreds of millions." 24 hours, Rashid said firmly. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow." After they left, Rashid locked his office door and made a call to his private secretary, not the company's secretary who reported to Khalid, but the personal assistant who had worked for him for 15 years and owed her loyalty to him alone. "Fatima, I need you to book me a flight to Accra. Tonight if possible. Tomorrow. Morning at the latest." "Sir, Mr. Khalid has asked me to route all your travel requests through him for approval." "Fatima, whose name is on your paycheck?" "Yours, sir." "Then book the flight. And do it from your personal computer, not the company system." "Yes, sir. Should I arrange for company security?" Rashid considered this. Company security would report to Khalid, but traveling alone to a foreign country to meet a daughter he'd never known, while his own family actively opposed the reunion, carried its own risks. "No, this is personal travel. Just book the flight." Meanwhile, in Ghana, Khadija and Casey were dealing with their own form of pressure. Word had somehow spread through certain circles that a wealthy Gulf businessman might be coming to Ghana, and that significant money might be involved. By the second day after the phone call, 3 different men had approached Kessie with business propositions. The first claimed to be a lawyer representing international interests who could help facilitate any meetings with foreign nationals. The second offered security services for important visitors from abroad. The third was more direct. He offered to pay Kessie a substantial sum for information about her father's travel plans. "They're trying to monitor and control the situation from here too," Kessie observed as they walked through Makola Market, deliberately choosing crowded public spaces where their conversations couldn't be easily overheard. The reach of wealthy families extends far beyond their home countries, Khadija agreed. Money creates networks that cross borders. They had moved from Auntie Rose's compound to a small guest house in a different part of the city, partly for privacy and partly because Rose had begun receiving visits from people asking questions about her foreign visitor. "I'm scared," Kessie admitted as they stopped at a fruit vendor's stall. "Not of meeting him, but of what meeting him might cost. What if they're right? What if knowing me really does destroy everything he's built?" Khadija bought mangoes from the vendor, using the transaction as cover for their conversation. "Kessie, let me ask you something. If you had a daughter and powerful people told you that acknowledging her would cost you your career, your status, your security, what would you do?" "I'd choose my daughter, even if it meant she might face consequences for your choice." Kessie was quiet for a moment, considering. "I'd want my daughter to have the chance to make that choice herself, to decide whether having a father was worth the complications that came with him. Then you understand why this decision has to be yours, not his family's, not his business partners, not even his. Yours." That evening, as they sat in their small room at the guest house, Kessie's phone rang. The number was international, but not one she recognized. "Hello? Kessie, it's me, your father." His voice sounded different, strained, urgent. "Are you safe?" "Yes, why?" "Because I'm coming to Ghana tomorrow, and my family is trying very hard to prevent it. There may be complications." "What kind of complications?" "The kind that involve people with money trying to control people without it. But Kessie, I need you to know, whatever happens when I arrive, whatever pressure you face, whatever offers or threats are made, the choice is yours. I won't let anyone force you into a relationship you don't want, and I won't let anyone force you away from one you do want. Are you going to lose everything because of this?" Rashid was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a certainty that surprised both of them. "I lost everything 23 years ago when I let fear convince me to send you and your mother away. Everything else, the company, the reputation, the approval of people whose love comes with conditions, those are just things I accumulated while running from what really mattered. And if they try to stop you from coming, then they'll discover that some fights are worth having, even when you're not sure you can win them." After the call ended, Kessie sat in the darkness of their small room, thinking about choices and consequences, about the weight of being someone's daughter when someone lived in a world where daughters could be liabilities or assets, but rarely just people worthy of love. "Cousin," she said to Khadija, who was lying on the narrow bed beside her, "tomorrow is going to change everything, isn't it?" "Yes," Khadija replied softly. "The question is whether it changes things for the better or just differently." "I'm ready," Kessie said, though her voice trembled slightly. "Whatever comes next, I'm ready to meet my father." Outside their window, Accra's night sounds continued. Traffic, music, the distant laughter of people whose lives weren't being torn apart by decisions made decades before they were born. But inside the small room, 2 women prepared for a reunion that would test every assumption they had about family, love, and the price of choosing truth over safety. Tomorrow, Rashid Al-Mansouri would either board a plane to meet the daughter he had abandoned or discover that some cages are strong enough to hold even the most desperate attempts at freedom. The battle lines were drawn. The only question remaining was who would have the courage to cross them. Rashid's flight landed at Qatar International Airport at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning that would reshape 3 lives forever. He had flown commercial rather than private, to avoid the tracking systems his family used to monitor company aircraft. His only luggage was a small carry-on bag and a briefcase containing 23 years of memories he had finally found the courage to share. Casey and Khadija waited in the arrivals hall, both nervous for different reasons. For Khadija, this moment represented the successful completion of an impossible mission. For Casey, it meant meeting the man whose absence had defined her entire existence. When Rashid emerged from customs, Casey recognized him immediately, despite having never seen him in person. The photographs Khadija had shown her hadn't captured his height or the way he moved with careful dignity, but his eyes, those were exactly as she had imagined them. Dark, intelligent, and carrying a weight that spoke of years spent looking backward instead of forward. He saw them at the same moment, and his stride faltered. For a heartbeat, he simply stared at the young woman who carried his features mixed with Amara's grace, seeing for the first time the living proof that love could survive even the most determined attempts to destroy it. "Cassie," he said when he reached them, her name a whisper of wonder. "Baba," she replied, testing the word that had lived in her imagination for 2 decades. They stood in the busy airport, surrounded by the chaos of travelers and taxis and vendors. But for that moment, they existed in a bubble of recognition that excluded everything else. "You look like her," Rashid said softly, "but you have your own strength. I can see it." "I had to develop it," Casey replied without accusation. "Mama made sure I understood that depending on anyone else was a luxury we couldn't afford." Rashid winced, but nodded. "She was right to teach you that. I failed you both." "Yes, you did," Casey said simply. "The question is what you plan to do about it now." They drove through Accra in a taxi that Khadija had arranged, the 3 of them squeezed into the back seat as the city woke up around them. Rashid stared out the window with the fascination of a man seeing the world his daughter had grown up in. The street vendors preparing for the day, children in school uniforms walking in small groups, the endless energy of a place where survival required creativity and community. "This is where you lived," he said, not quite a question. "This is where we built our life after you sent us away," Cassie corrected. "Mama worked as a seamstress, then as a teacher when she could afford the additional training. I grew up in compound. Houses where families shared everything because individual survival was impossible." Rashid absorbed this silently, each detail a small knife cutting through the comfortable narratives he had told himself about providing financial support from a distance. They went first to the small cemetery in Teshi where Amara was buried. It was a modest place, crowded with graves marked by simple concrete headstones and occasional offerings of flowers or food left by visiting relatives. Amara's grave was marked only with her name, dates, and a single line in Twi that Rashid couldn't read. "What does it say?" he asked. "She loved completely," Cassie translated, "even when love wasn't returned." Rashid knelt beside the grave, placing his hand on the sun-warmed concrete. When he spoke, his voice was thick with tears he had held back for decades. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry for being a coward. I'm sorry for choosing my fears over our family. I'm sorry for letting you die, thinking I didn't care." Cassie watched her father break down at her mother's grave, this powerful man reduced to the grief he had been running from since she was born. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentle but firm. "She forgave you years ago, Baba. The question is whether you can forgive yourself." They spent the rest of the morning at the compound where Cassie had grown up, meeting Auntie Rose and the extended community that had raised her. Rashid was overwhelmed by the warmth with which he was received, not as a wealthy businessman seeking redemption, but as Kessie's father finally come home. It was Auntie Rose who delivered the final truth that would reshape everything. "Mr. Rashid," she said, as they sat in the small courtyard where Kessie had done her homework and learned to be strong, "there's something Kessie doesn't know. Something Amara made me promise to tell only if you ever came." Kessie looked between them, sensing another revelation that would shift the ground beneath her understanding. "What is it, Auntie?" Rose disappeared into her room and returned with a small wooden box that Rashid recognized immediately, one he had given Amara as a wedding gift. "Your mother never stopped writing to your father," Rose said, opening the box to reveal dozens of letters. But these weren't the letters he received. These were the ones she wrote after his family made it clear that contact would bring consequences. Khadija leaned forward. What kind of consequences? They told her that any attempt to maintain contact would result in Rashid losing his inheritance, his position, everything. They convinced her that loving him meant protecting him from the scandal she represented. Rashid's face went pale. "They told me she wanted nothing more to do with us, that she had found someone else, built a new life." "She never found anyone else," Rose said quietly. "She spent 23 years protecting a man who she believed would be destroyed if the world knew about their love." Kessie stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the courtyard as the full scope of the deception became clear. "You were both victims," she said finally. "They separated you by convincing each of you that staying apart was protecting the other." Rashid stood as well, his hands shaking as he reached for one of Amara's undelivered letters. As he read, his expression shifted from grief to rage to a determination that seemed to transform him physically. "Khalid," he said simply, "this has his fingerprints all over it." "What are you going to do?" Khadija asked. Rashid looked at his daughter, this remarkable woman who had survived decades of manipulation and emerged with her integrity intact. "I'm going to choose differently this time. I'm going to choose family over fear, truth over reputation, love over the approval of people who mistake cruelty for strength." His phone rang. The caller ID showed Khalid's number. "Answer it," Kessie said. "Put it on speaker. It's time we all heard what he has to say." Rashid accepted the call. Khalid's voice filled the courtyard, cold and calculating. "Rashid, you've made a serious mistake. Come home immediately, and we can still manage this situation." "The only mistake I made was trusting you with my family's welfare for 23 years. Don't be dramatic. The girl is fine. We've taken excellent care of her education fund, her health care, her isolation," Rashid interrupted, "her mother's fear, the lies that kept us apart while you played puppet master with our lives. I protected this family. You destroyed this family," Kessie said clearly, her voice carrying across the phone connection. "And now you're about to lose the one person whose approval you needed to maintain your power." There was silence on the other end. Then Khalid's voice, sharper now with desperation. "If you don't return immediately, if you continue this charade, the board will remove you. You'll lose everything." Rashid looked around the courtyard, at Kessie's determined face, at Khadija's supportive smile, at Auntie Rose's knowing nod, at the community that had raised his daughter with the love he should have provided. "Khalid," he said calmly, "I already lost everything 23 years ago. What you're threatening to take from me now are just the consolation prizes I accumulated while running from what really mattered." He ended the call and turned to Kessie. "I can't undo the past. I can't give you the father you deserved when you were growing up, but if you'll let me, I'd like to learn how to be the father you deserve now." Kessie studied his face, seeing past the wealth and power to the broken man, who had finally found the courage to choose love over fear. "It won't be easy," she said. "I won't pretend the years of abandonment didn't happen. I won't make this simple for you just because you finally did the right thing. I wouldn't want you to. And I won't move to Qatar. I won't become the daughter who fits into your world. If you want to know me, you'll have to learn to exist in mine." Rashid smiled, the first genuine smile Khadija had seen from him since she'd known him. "Then I guess I'll be spending a lot more time in Ghana." As the sun set over Accra that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, Rashid Al-Mansouri sat in a plastic chair in a compound courtyard, listening to his daughter tell stories about the life she had built without him. Beside them, Khadija watched the beginning of a relationship that would be complicated and imperfect, but rooted in truth rather than fear. 3 days later, news broke that Rashid Al-Mansouri had stepped down as CEO of Al-Mansouri Holdings to pursue personal interests in African development and education. The business world speculated about hostile takeovers and family disputes, but Rashid no longer cared about their speculation. He had found something more valuable than corporate control or family approval. He had found his way back to the people who mattered most, guided by a temporary assistant who had turned out to be exactly the bridge between worlds that he needed. And on her last day in Qatar, the day she was originally scheduled to complete her 30-day contract, Khadija finally revealed her true identity, not just as Casey's cousin and Rashid's employee, but as the woman who had proven that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations begin with the simplest act of showing up and refusing to remain invisible. Family, she had learned, was not about blood or borders or the approval of powerful people. It was about the courage to choose love when love was difficult, truth when truth was dangerous, and connection when connection required sacrificing everything you thought you needed for everything you actually did. The story that began with a temporary position had become a permanent reminder that the most important work we do is often the work of bringing people home to themselves and to each other. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.